Damos inicio al ciclo de conferencias magistrales del Día de Apertura del Modelo de las Naciones Unidas. Tenemos el honor de presentar al doctor Kamal Soleimani, quien impartirá su ponencia en inglés titulada El PKK y la cuestión kurda. Permitámonos compartir brevemente su semblanza. El doctor Kamal es profesor especializado en la historia política del mundo islámico y del Medio Oriente. Obtuvo la licenciatura en filosofía por la University of Southern Maine 2005 y maestría 2008, y el doctorado 2014 en historia del Medio Oriente e historia islámica por Columbia University. Su tesis doctoral analizó el Islam y los nacionalismos en competencia con el Medio Oriente moderno. Ha sido profesor en universidades de Turquía, Estados Unidos y América Latina. Sus líneas de investigación incluyen minoritización, colonización, securitización, soberanía, nacionalismo religioso e islamismo. Sus trabajos han sido publicados en revistas académicas internacionales como Contemporary Islam, Current Anthropology, Security Dialogue, Nations and Nationalism, Third World Currently, Ethnicities, The British Journal of Sociology, Postcolonial Studies and Mutualism World, entre otras. Recibamos con un fuerte aplauso al doctor Kamal Soleimani.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días. I'm sorry I have to speak in English. I know it's a little bit embarrassing, but there is no other way to communicate with you. It's really a great honor to be here. And I want to thank the faculty and the students, and especially Mr. Dagger and all the organizers for this eventuality. I'm extremely grateful. So I'm going to talk about the peace process, supposedly, and the PKK's disarmament. Because I know the topic would be somewhat unfamiliar to most of us here. I am going to talk about three historical periods from 1978 with the foundation of PKK, or Kurdistan Workers' Party, and then until 1999, when the founder of this party was captured. And from then, or from 2000 to 2024, and from 2024 until present, which in the last year, there is a process about disarmament of this group. It is a very important thing because we have Kurds in 4 countries, and there is a lot of conflict, especially for the students of international relations, related to this issue. So hopefully, I'll try to be a little bit slow while I was trying to keep my remarks short, because I want to have discussion and Q&A, longer session for that. So, yes, this is where Kurdistan historically is located, where the Kurdish people are. And so you can see from the colors. Since the foundation of the Turkish Republic in 1924, the state has systematically denied the existence of the Kurds and as a distinct people, and treated the Kurdish identity and language as a threat to national unity. Speaking Kurdish in public, which is the language that the Kurds use, or private, was criminalized. For decades, with the Kurds punished for merely using their mother tongue. Although Turkey's constitution has been amended many times, largely to the Kurdish resistance, domestic human rights campaigns, and international pressure, and the European Union, it still enshrines a monolithic conception of the nation. So this is a Turkish newspaper from 1938, which says anyone who speaks Kurdish would be imprisoned. Across the 18 separate constitutional clauses, the term Turkish defines citizenship, sovereignty, and even the judiciary and the land. So you can see it in Articles 3, 5, 6, 9, and 66 and 7. This structure does not merely privilege Turkish ethnicity. It codifies it as sacred, effectively excluding Kurds and other minoritized peoples from the legal, symbolic boundaries of the nation, as reflected in the clause, the eternal existence of the Turkish state and nation, and, quote, independence and integrity of the Turkish nation, Articles 3 and 5 of the Constitution. In this sense, Turkey's constitutional framework remains one of the most ethnically and racially rigid in the modern world. To make the laws of this country even appear non-racist would require far-reaching structural and constitutional transformation, not least a break with the provisions that A, defines the state and homeland as exclusively Turkish in the Article 3 and 5, B, reserve lawmaking and judicial authority to the Turkish nation in the Articles 7 and 9 of the Constitution, and C, defines every citizen as Turk and ties access to the public service to the identity, like Article 66 and Article 70 of the Constitution, while prohibiting any language other than Turkish as a mother tongue. So there is only one mother tongue in this country officially, and language of education as indicated in the Article 42. So as long as Turkishness is equated with the citizenship and national belonging in this way, Kurdish identity will remain outside the constitutional order, acknowledged only as an object of tolerance, never as a political or collective right of existence. Therefore, Öcalan, which is the founder of the PKK, when Öcalan declares that the PKK's mission has ended because the denial of the Kurds no longer exist, as he did in his order for dissolving that organization, the PKK, on February of this year, means 2025, his statement not only misrepresents history, but also legitimizes a system whose very foundation rests on the constitutional erasure of the Kurdish nation's existence. So now from 1978 to 2000, what was going on with this party and the Kurdish situation? The PKK, which is that party, was founded in 1978 around Abdullah Öcalan, the leader, and a small group of activists from northern Kurdistan under the Turkish rule, which is supposed to be, this is the Öcalan, along with Mustafa Kemal. You see the aura of cold leadership. From the very beginning, authority was highly centralized around Öcalan's hands. He was later called Önder, a Turkish word, means the leader, a title that in Turkey's political lexicon evokes Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's singular tutelary role. This personalization of authority would shape the PKK strategy discourse, and political culture for decades. So, for roughly 20 years, Öcalan operated out of Syria. Yes. Oops. I kind of messed up. Oh. So it doesn't go back. I'm sorry. Okay, this one was good. The globe was good. Can you go back one more? This one. Good. Out of Syria. Turning Damascus, the capital of that country, into a rear base. Inside Turkey, the 1996 Susurluk car crash exposing deep ties among the state security apparatus, nationalist militants, and organized crime eroded public confidence in the government. In the aftermath of that car crash, Ankara redirected its energy toward the PKK's problem in Syria. In October 1998, under the Turkish military pressure and the threat of war, Syria expelled Öcalan and shut down the PKK Syrian sanctuary. So, after 3 months odyssey through several countries, Öcalan was captured in Nairobi, Kenya, in Africa, in February 1999, in an operation involving multiple intelligence agencies, reportedly including those of the United States and Israel. His capture marked a decisive turning point for the Kurds. From his first court appearance, Öcalan signaled his willingness to align with the Turkish state's expectation. By the end of his trial, he publicly declared his readiness, quote, serve the Turkish state, end quote. This, we are talking about revolution, so it's it's only natural. This moment did not represent a sudden rupture, but the culmination of a long, incremental repositioning toward accommodation within Turkey's national constitutional order. So, even before his capture, even before Öcalan's capture, the movement's geographical references and map revealed a paradox. At the level of propaganda, the PKK rejected colonial borders by adopting the fourfold Kurdish rubric of Kurdistan North, South, East, and West, these are not accepted by the states. In practice, its emotional and operational center of gravity remained Turkey. So, its idiom of modernization and social transformation bore the unmistakable imprint of the very Turkish centrist Kemalist epistemology. Kemalist ideology is the ideology that rules, and the Turkish republic was founded on. So, what I'm trying to say that despite the fact that PKK claimed to be for an independent Kurdistan, in terms of worldview, politics, strategies, even epistemological approach, remained Kemalist, the hostage of very ideology that was fighting against. So, a revealing moment came as early as 1988. PKK declared war or started war against Turkey in 1984. In Öcalan's interview with the Turkish journalist Muhammad Ali Birand, this was the thing, asked, what do you demand from the state? Öcalan replied, quote, it is the state must come up with a solution, end quote. Striking words for a leader supposedly waging a war for Kurdish independence. By 1993, he was calling Kurds and Turks historically inseparable, that cannot be separated, and signaling readiness for a political settlement that kept Kurds within Turkey, provided legal guarantees. He even floated for the first time the prospect of disarmament, to lay down their arms under favorable conditions. The rhetoric of independence was already yielding to a doctrine of coexistence and reform, means within Turkey. Yes. By 1996, this shift had acquired a more pragmatic form in Öcalan and PKK's stand. In interviews, Öcalan proposed a federal type. So from independence comes down to federalism. Federal type arrangements within existing states, Turkey, Iran, Iraq, citing Germany, Spain, Switzerland as examples, because they have federal systems, this country. He explicitly rejected the Syrian Kurdistan, which is the yellow one. Syrian Kurdistan aligning with Damascus' position, with the Syrian state's position that the Kurds were immigrants from the northern Kurdistan under Turkish rule. Whatever the tactical reasoning, the effect was clear: to de-emphasize pan-Kurdish statehood and recenter the focus within Turkey's political framework. So, the point to a deeper continuity, the PKK never developed a concrete or serious blueprint for an independent Kurdish nation. So what I'm trying to say, it was mostly a propaganda rather than a decided and spelled out strategy. But it was very costly for the Kurds. The slogan was very attractive, and Kurds from 4 parts of Kurdistan were joining this party because of the slogan of independence. What emerged after 2005 as Öcalan's so-called theory of democratic confederalism was not a break from the past, but a crystallization of earlier disposition, accepting a sub-state forms for Kurdish existence, but in a more ambiguous political register. So after he was captured, 5 years after he was captured, Öcalan proposed something called democratic confederalism, which was neither confederalism nor democratic, which hopefully we can talk about it later. Across 1980s and 1990s, 2 tracks ran in tension. Discursively, in terms of propaganda, the PKK adopted the broader Kurdish nationalist renaming that thought to transcend colonial partitions of Kurdistan. Operationally, in practice, it remained anchored in the Turkish state's territorial and epistemological frames, thinking still within Turkey while they had this propaganda. It is modernization vocabulary, stressing progress, social engineering, and tutelary leadership often reproduce the civilizational grammar of the Kemalist, means what is ruling the ideology that rules Turkey, even as it claims to oppose that. So these contradictions that exist in the party. That dissonance or contradictions, the colonial in language yet statist in orientation, shaped the movement's praxis before 2000, the year 2000, before the capture of Öcalan. So you had all these contradictions. Susurluk, which was a car accident in Turkey that a security head of Istanbul, a parliamentarian, and a mafia leader were all in the same car and created an uproar in Turkey. So it was a scandal. This Susurluk scandal of 1999 marked a hinge between eras. Thereafter, the Turkish regime incrementally pursued a strategy to dislodge Öcalan from Syria. It's natural. When you talk about Kurds, the entire universe goes against you. So by late 1998, Damascus, or the capital of the the Syrian state, expelled him under Turkish pressure. So we talked about this. So let's talk about after he was captured, which was in 1999 until last year. By the end of 1999, the pillars were in place: a Turkish-centered horizon, a public renunciation of secession, meaning that we no longer want to be independent, or we don't want a separate Kurdistan, and a leader prepared to redefine the PKK's declared purpose, which was independence and now completely unknown. Talked about democratic confederalism, which was neither confederalism nor democratic. What followed between the year 2000 and recent disarmament, which they declared they would be laying down their weapons, was not merely a tactical adjustment, but an epistemological, political, and organizational evolution, which I claim that the seeds of what happened now already there when the organization was founded. So it is just an evolution, not a fundamental transformation. So the movement's full reinscription within the conceptual and legal boundaries of the Turkish state that happened. In the early 2000s, the PKK began rebranding itself, culminating in 2005 with the creation of the Kurdistan Communities Union, or KCK, an umbrella structure for a new model called democratic confederalism, which I talked about it briefly. In his Turkish book, Democratic Liberation, which is a like prison notebook, page 231, Öcalan himself clearly states the KCK emerged from negotiations with Imre Taner, then the head of Turkish intelligence. So, an exchange for, quote, democratization of Turkey, presented as an anti-state, participatory, alternative state-oriented mentality, end quote. Democratic confederalism was propagated among Kurds and others as a non-nation state to the Kurdish question. Usually it's compared with Zapatista's views for people who are this non-state system, which we found out that actually it is a negotiation with the Turkish intelligence branch of the Turkish state rather than a solution. So, and it was happened, so the exchange was for the democratization of Turkey. Öcalan, in a Turkish book of the same title, which it's right here, of the same title explicitly states that he is neither calling for a change of the Turkish unitary system nor demanding confederalism in the political sense. For people who are familiar especially in the political science. Usually, the unitary state system is a system when you have a centralized government without regional systems like confederalism, federalism, or regional autonomy. So he's for the unitary state system in Turkey. Instead, he frames his model as a civil, societal framework realizable within the constitutional order of the Turkish unitary state. Strikingly, he argues that his form of confederalism would prevent both official recognition of the Kurdish language and any potential demand for a Kurdish federation akin to what we have in Iraqi Kurdistan, or as the Kurds call it, South Kurdistan. In fact, he maintains, becomes very interesting, that granting Kurdish an official status means you recognize Kurdish as one of the language or official languages, could lead to the danger of Kurdish demand for federalism. So a Kurdish leader who once asked for Kurdish independence, now he is against the Kurdish language to be officialized because it could be a danger to that the Kurds might ask federalism or federal form of self-rule. What was circulated as emancipatory paradigm was at its core a self-limiting discourse designed to align Kurdish aspirations with the structural integrity of the Turkish state, precisely the state against which the Kurds had been fighting since 1925. So the Turkish Republic was founded in 1924, and just the next year the Kurds started fighting against the state. I'm going to skip a little bit because it's better to have some discussions. So what you see here is interesting. So this idea that we should stay within the Turkish constitutional order with the unitary state, so led in creation of a number of Kurdish pro-Öcalan Kurdish parties. The first one was BDP, or the Democratic People's Party, and later there was HDP, so you see their leaders, and the first two usually they believe in sharing leadership. They call them co-chairs. The two are now in prison, the first two on the top. And they, in 2023, they changed that party into them party like Democratic People's Party. There is always democracy involved when you don't have democracy. So, and now these are the two co-chairs. The man is a Kurd and the woman is an Arab from Turkey. But they are not in the prison yet. Yes. So all these things showed or an indication of the reconciliatory politics of that party. This reconciliationist turn reached its symbolic heights during the previous peace process, which was in 2014 and 15. There was another, actually started almost in 2009 and lasted until 2015. There was a peace process between the state and the Kurds, which ended with destroying about 12 cities, Kurdish cities inside Turkey, and about 1.5 million of people were misplaced, and they were moved to other areas. So between 2009 and 2015, Öcalan and the Turkish state engaged in intermittent dialogue, culminating in his 2013 New Year message, Öcalan's, calling for the ceasefire of a ceasefire and PKK withdrawal from Turkey. So they had all the guerrilla inside Turkey. They would leave Turkey and go outside as a sign for reconciliation. So celebrated as a historic breakthrough, and the process soon revealed a structural asymmetry. The Turkish state naturally retained a monopoly on sovereignty, yet proved unwilling even to acknowledge Kurdish cultural identity and its public signifiers. So, yes. Yet, Erdogan regime, which was still the leader, and it will be there until he dies, Erdogan regime treated even peace as an obstacle to its monopoly of power, because the president felt that the peace would impede his re-election. So in order to be re-elected, there was a war, despite the fact that there wasn't great Kurdish demands. So now I'm going to talk with all these introductory things about what's been happening since last October until now. So it's been about a year. There are talks about a process, which is undefined process. In Turkey, they just call it süreç, means process. Or sometimes they call it solution process, because they don't want to name it in any ways. By the late 2024, it was as if the Turkish state's long-term script for the Kurdish question had entered its penultimate act. Commentators often point to three factors behind this apparent change of heart: the growing power of Israel in the Middle East, and Ankara, which is the capital of the states. Ankara's fear that the PKK forces could be instrumentalized within the regional equation. We know that there was war between Iran, Hezbollah, in Palestine, and so Israel very much destroyed all these proxy organizations that were aligned with the Iranian state, despite the people's contention and people's disagreement. And so Israel is pretty much the determinative actor in the region. And so this could be one of the reasons that the Turkey now one more time talks about a peace-like thing with the Kurds, because the PKK forces could be used by Israel. So this is one of the concerns that they talk about. So the other thing is the ruling bloc needs, so the ruling bloc needs Kurdish party to support and secure constitutional change that would open the way for Erdogan's third-term re-election. In the Turkish constitution, the president, unlike Mexico that you have one term, the president could be re-elected 3 times. And now the president of Turkey doesn't want to die and doesn't want to retire, so he asks for another term of re-election. And in order to do that, they need to change the constitution. And in order to be able to change the constitution, you need a certain amount of parliamentary votes. So there are 2 main parties that agree, or there is state party and another one that agree with the president, and they don't have the sufficient majority to change the constitution. So if the Kurdish party, with the 2 leaders in prison, willing to vote for the president, he could become a president one more time. He's about 70-something years old, but maybe as many times as he can. So this could be another reason for what is going on. So, and then There is another issue, which is the third issue is Öcalan is very old, the Kurdish leader who is imprisoned. He is over 75 years old. There are fears about what's going to happen, whether he's been in prison for 25 years. He might lose his brain, become senile, como se senile? Senilidad. So senile, or that loses his grip, or the party, and then, so he's still alive and conscious, and we can use him. So this is another reason that that the new process began. So it's this way. I'm sorry. So it's like Öcalan's brain. It doesn't. Oh, okay. Okay. So. So in October 2024, Dawlat Bakhshali, you see the guy, the angry guy on the top, as the ultra-nationalist leader of a party which is extremely racist called National Actionist Party, or MHP, and is Erdogan's main supporter, took the floor in the Turkish parliament and unexpectedly called for lifting the prison isolation of Öcalan so that he could declare, quote unquote, the end of terror. By that time, Öcalan had not been able to see anyone, even his family, for 4 years and a half. He was in prison isolation. So he said, end the prison isolation, this way he can come to the parliament and declare the end of terror, means the end of the PKK. So, and order the PKK to lay down arms, its arms unconditionally, with no condition. Within weeks, Öcalan responded affirmatively, said yes. So, on on February 2025, in a written statement conveyed through a Kurdish representative in the Turkish parliament, Öcalan ordered the PKK to disarm and dissolve itself unconditionally. And this is actually signed by this group and documented by that Kurdish party. And this statement there is Öcalan's statement that says unconditionally. So urging the PKK to reintegrate itself into the state and Turkish society. He declared that the PKK's historical relevance had ended with the collapse of existing socialism in 1990s, like former Soviet Union and whatever we had this, although the Cuba still exists, but Öcalan doesn't recognize it apparently as existing socialist countries. In 1990s, that any form of separate Kurdish political system, an independent state, confederal or federal arrangement, or what he terms culturalist solutions was merely an expression of extreme nationalism. So even if the Kurds ask for language rights, from Öcalan's perspective, it would be an extremist nationalism. So Kurds should not even talk about their languages, what is he called culturalist solutions. And you see that thing in the Turkish version, if anyone can read Turkish. Yet even Öcalan delivered exactly what Bakhshali, or that guy, had demanded the state dragged its feet. And this is the interesting part about the process. So Turkish state initially welcomed the declaration, but over the following 9 months, so it's been 9 months, showed little urgency in formalizing this armament or establish any legal framework for the post-conflict, and instead clinging to the process of the official label, the process to end terrorism, a phrase that perfectly captured its unilateral logic, meaning that despite the fact they declared disarmament and they dissolved themselves officially, although they are still in the mountain, but officially PKK does not exist. And yet the Turkish state has not started any legal arrangement for what is going to happen with these people in the mountain. They come back, there will be general amnesty, or what would be the solution, or what will be the fate of these people. Nothing of this sort has clearly been discussed or formulated, at least legally, within the parliament. So, on the other side, the PKK and DEM party, the Kurdish party, rebranded themselves and so sold the PKK's self-dissolution and disarmament to the Kurds as a step on the path of peace. So while the state talks about the end of terrorism, the Kurdish parties talk about it as a peace process. So there is a complete, let's say, contradiction, or there is not a coherence about what the process is. So it's a disconnect between what the state calls the process and what the Kurds themselves call the process. From the state's perspective, it is the end of terrorism, and from the Kurdish perspective, it is a peace process. So, yes, this asymmetry or this disconnect exposed the core truth about the so-called peace process, as it was never a reciprocal negotiation between the equals. Okay. So this disconnect shows itself in a very strange way. Nowhere is asymmetry clearer than the creation of the Commission for Brotherhood and Social Harmony. So this is the commission in the Turkish parliament. So apparently, that commission is tasked with guiding the post-conflict reconciliation. The commission instead dramatized the limits of what Kurdish side called the peace process. At one of the opening sessions, when the Kurdish, so there is a group of women, they called them Peace Mother. I think they were inspired by what was happening in Latin America. I don't know which country they had this. So you see these three women in the Kurdish dress or clothing. So they were invited by that commission to the parliament, but when they said it would be easier for them to express in Kurdish, their mother tongue, they were not allowed, because the people in the commission of the parliament, they said, you can only talk in the official language, which is Turkish. So this is the peace commission who is trying to resolve the conflict or deal with the post-conflict situation. Therefore, to say that the PKK unconditionally surrendered to the state, strategy, logic, and vocabulary is an understatement, because the organization not only declared disarmament, it dissolved itself, which it was not necessary for, because they could have existed as a political entity without arms. While for months after that, Ankara continued to bomb its position. So they declared ceasefire, they declared self-dissolution, we no longer exist, but they were still bombed by the state. So the state still bombed them on the mountains. So to summarize it, what has been branded as a peace or as peace is not a settlement but silencing. The liquidation of Kurdish political claims under an unchanged, rigidly Turkish constitutional order, because all these, at least 14 places, even the judiciary is Turkish. Turkish not belong to the state of Turkey. It means ethnically Turkish. The judiciary, the parliament, and the sovereignty solely belongs to the Turkish ethnic groups, and the land and the language in this country is only Turkish. So this is the constitutional order. Nothing will change. And the so-called process to end terrorism achieved what decades of counter-insurgency could not. So it recast Kurdish denationalization as self-modernization. This is Öcalan's language. Öcalan, the leader at Öcalan's adaptation of the state's colonial logic, which can be called colomentalism or mentality of the colonial power or the colonizer's reason, speaking through the colonized language, becomes embedded in the discourse of the politics itself, of Kurdish politics itself. By 2025, the outcome is stark. So I am talking about beginning of this year. Kurdishness is allowed as folklore, not as a foundation. The Kurdish language may be sung, which many people still killed for singing even, not legislated. A movement once defined by resistance has dissolved itself and not even permitted an NGO-like existence. So even as like an NGO cannot exist. What the state calls the process of ending terror is deceptively rebranded into PKK's circle as a peace process, despite the absence of any basic peace architecture. No mutual recognition, like two sides of the conflict, no parity or equality, no binding guarantees for the state, no reckoning with the state violence, which 80,000 people have been killed since 1984. And thousands of people were killed. They called them fail majhul cinayetleri in Turkish. The crime is with unknown perpetrators. I remember one of the deputy of the head of the Turkish intelligence said there was a time when they reported about someone. If the person was a Turk, they would investigate what's going on. If the person was a Kurd, he would be killed, executed immediately without any investigation. And after this car accident that I talked about, the state at the time, there was a prime minister named Masoud Yilmaz. They opened an investigation and there was a report about it. By that time, by 1996, there were 405,000 extrajudiciary killings of Kurds. So, but nothing to talk about this past. The state sets the terms and tempo, and the PKK is told to dissolve, disarm unconditionally, and re-enter a polity that still denies Kurdish collective existence. So, under the current configuration, Öcalan's so-called peace amounts to the managed liquidation of Kurdish political subjectivity and removal of the Kurdishness from the realm of the political. Core demands, nationhood, self-government, mother tongue education, collective rights are erased or pathologized as extreme nationalism, and any attempts to revive them is prematurely criminalized as terror, a process that refuses to recognize the Kurdish question as a political question and cannot credibly be called peace. It is a normalization of the subordination under the systematic mask of ending terror. So now the question might be, the Kurds did gain anything? On the collective level, no, but on the personal level, I want to show you so Mr. Öcalan, this is the first picture. The slim one is when he declared the PKK should dissolve itself. So that one is from February. And the second one from July. So Mr. Öcalan gained a huge belly, and this is what the Kurds have. I don't know whether you got this joke. Yes. So thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry that it was in English. So if there is any questions, comments, or anything, so.
Thanks, Mr. Kemal. I really appreciate you talking about this, because I rarely hear that somebody speaks about the Kurdish question. My first question will be, we spoke mostly from 1924, more concretely to the present, right? I wonder how was life and oppression for Kurdish people during the Ataturk, Enver Pasha, and before 1924, the Ottoman Empire. How was it worse? Was it better? I don't think it was better, considering that the Armenians were persecuted and were genocided too during Enver Pasha's reign.
Yes.
So I wonder what's the story behind 1924.
Yes. Thank you very much. It's a great question, and the reality is what we witness now is an outcome of at least 150 years of state policy. So it goes back to the Ottoman state. The first constitution of the first Ottoman constitution was ratified in 1876, so would be around 150 years before now. And I'm glad that you talked about the Armenian genocide. Even before that constitution, I have written a book about Islam and nationalism, which is mostly about the Ottoman Empire. So before the Armenian genocide, we have a precursor strategy in which the Ottoman state, before adopting the Armenian genocide, you have linguicide. It starts, so I'm kind of giving you a very long answer to hopefully it won't be so boring. So in 1847, which would be 2 centuries ago, the Ottoman state sends a group of teachers to Libya, Benghazi, and Tripoli. It's very revealing and says, this way the people, the group, would go from Istanbul to Libya. They are all Turkish with the Turkish books, and they will teach people to learn the sublime language of the state and to learn how to become obedient. So education 200 years ago was used, more than 200 years ago, 200 something years ago, as a tool as a civilizational tool to civilize these people in the state's language. And from this point forward, you have constantly the state monitoring all these, especially religious minority schools that were helped by Christians outside the world, especially Armenians, to a point that they not only there is an inspector, the state implants spies to see whether in those schools Turkish language is taught. So it continues until the ratification of the first constitution in the Ottoman Empire. In that one, that specific copy of the constitution, or the first constitution, says, anyone who, first of all, the Turkish language is official, which is, from the perspective of many scholars, this is the beginning of internal colonization. People like Eugene Weber, who has written extensively on nationalism, or people like James Scott, who died recently, the famous anthropologist. So, and then it says, everywhere in empire, which was a vast empire with many domains in the Arab world, everyone who works for the state has to know the Turkish language. We are talking about a vast population. The public education was not still a common thing. But even in order, for example, in Algeria or Tripoli or Egypt, in order to become the state clerk or work for the state, you had to know the Turkish language. So I am trying to say that what happened in terms of the Turkification of the language, of the education, of the bureaucracy, it had historical roots in previous century. And by the time of Anwar Pasha and the CUP, or the Committee of Union Progress, you had a new views added to what was going on already in the Ottoman previous rules of the Ottoman Empire. It was already an era that they were very much familiar with social Darwinism and with the ideas, especially this German general who taught in the Turkish Military Academy, which he wrote a famous book called A Nation in Arms, which was extremely social Darwinist in the sense that saw the nation as a single body that should be represented by the army. The entire nation was seen as a army garrison. And they felt, and so this is, you have all the seeds of eugenics, of the enhancement of the race, so that in order for the nation to survive, it's like a body, human body, that should be, that should remain healthy. And the army should watch the nation and make it train in this, according to them, in this era of survival, which if the nation is not fit, which actually the same ideas that go to the Nazi Germany, it goes from, so you have these German generals teach in the Turkish academies, and then the same views adopted by CUP, Anwar Pasha, and Talat Pasha, all the Pashas of the CUP between 1912 and 1920 until the end of the First World War. So, yes, and these guys, and actually the most of the Armenian genocide takes place, which begins from 1894, and it culminates in 1915 and 1916, but many people don't know that the genocide continues until 1928, which Ataturk was already in power. And in places like many, especially these areas closer to Greece, to like Izmir and others, thousands and thousands of Armenians are killed on daily basis until the 1928. So, and another element to this was that every population except the Turks in every place should be reduced below to 10% of the population. The first on the top of the list were Armenians, then Kurds, then Arabs, then Muslims who had migrated from various places from Balkans and from Caucasus. So this idea that the population should be engineered and in the way that should be dissolved in the Turkish culture it had a long legs in history. And what Mustafa Kemal did was just because the Turkish population compared to the Ottoman population had reduced by size, they were able to implement what the sultans and the CUP Anwar Pashas could not. And actually the quote from that newspaper was pretty much from the time of Ataturk. So he dies in 1937, I guess. So it's a year after that anyone who spoke Kurdish could be imprisoned for one word, should be imprisoned for 1 week. So I'm sorry it was a long winding answer, but it was the case, and actually Ataturk was the architecture of these policies, yes. Yes.
It was
The
clear.
architect, sorry.
Well, you gave me like, it was pretty fascist, the behavior of the Turkish state, and I would like to ask a couple more questions, but I guess it's going to take a long time, so I'm going to skip them and give it to someone else first. Thank you, Kemal.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for your conference. It was very enlightening. My question is regarding the Kurdish population in itself. How is it perceived outside of Turkey, the disarmament of the PKK in places like Syria, Iraq, Iran? And does the dearmament of the PKK means a cease in the look for a Kurdish state?
Okay, thank you. I just want to add one more thing to your question, which there are a number of good books. One of them is called Ataturk in the Nazi Imagination. This is a great book written by a professor at Princeton University, which tells you how much Hitler followed followed the footsteps of Ataturk for many things. In the Nazi Imagination by Steve Hedger, something like this. I don't remember the name, but he has another book about the same topic, so it's very interesting. Thank you for the question. So in Turkey and in Syria, the PKK's politics is the dominant one. In other places like Iraqi Kurdistan and Iranian Kurdistan, there are other parties that are more dominant, and pro-PKK's groups are less influential. One. And secondly, there is, as far as I know, there is only one Kurdish political party that asks for independence. In most of these regions, especially in the Iraqi side, they have a federal system. So you have a federative region of Kurdistan, which is constitutionally recognized. In the Iranian side, the Kurdish political parties used to ask for regional autonomy with limited power. for instance, the Kurdish language would be recognized, the Kurdish language would be part of the education to certain, let's level, at least from the elementary, let's say, to the middle school. And then certain aspects of the self-government would be in place, but things like, and the police would be regional police, but issues like foreign policies, defending the country, this would be led to the central government. So this would be part of the central government's prerogatives and power, authority. But now they have changed this, and most of the Kurdish parties in the Iranian side, or the Kurds called East Kurdistan, ask for a federative system, which there will be a federalism, which would be a little bit higher than the regional autonomy, with certain, so addition to the power of the regional system, because there is really no clear formula of what they exactly ask. That's why I cannot give you a very detailed thing about what, but formally they ask for federalism. In the Syrian Kurdistan, which is there is a group called YPG. It has many variations, but they are all under the influence of PKK and Abdullah Öcalan. They now ask for a decentralized state, but the language is so opaque that no one exactly knows what does decentralized state mean. They do this for various reasons. One would be the fact that the YPG is composed of both Arabs and Kurds, not just Kurds alone. So they have Arab allies, which they have problem with the current Al-Jolani or Ahmad Shara regime, which is, oops. It's almost an Armageddon. It's okay. So there are mostly secular Arabs that they are allies to the Kurds in that region. They talk about decentralized regime for all Syria, which for instance, Kurdish language would be part of the language of education, instruction in the schools. The other demands that they have are not very clear. So to come back to the core aspect of your question, I just tried to give you a big picture, which is a complicated picture. The Kurds in the Iraqi side, which we call it south, and the Iranian side, which we call it east, they are not so much under the influence of PKK. But they are all very unhappy because they ask all this bloodshed, 50 years of fight for what? Because they have no demands. Not only that, they have become the instrument of the state. Before, everything the state said against the Kurdish demands would be, so as what the state, as an oppressive state would sing. And now, Öcalan and his party kind of justifying what the state says, or his definition of the Kurdish demands of the Kurds themselves, which pretty much delegitimize all the Kurds ask, and they reached this point after 50 years. Yes. Okay. Yeah. I thought so. This is what we have. Yes. You're welcome. So I have no idea of the time.
Los estudiantes Giancarlo Palafox e Isaí Jonathan Sotelo harán entrega del reconocimiento y del regalo como muestra de agradecimiento al doctor Kamal Soleimani por su ponencia magistral, el PQK y la cuestión kurda.
El comité organizador de la mano del Departamento de Relaciones Internacionales de la Universidad Internacional UNINTER otorga el presente reconocimiento al doctor Kamal Soleimani por su ponencia magistral el PKK y la cuestión kurda en el UNINTERMUN 2025, Unidos en Diálogo, Unidos en Acción, impartida el 18 de noviembre de 2025.
Thank you very much for listening. Appreciate it a lot. Thanks.
Tomaremos 10 minutos de receso y regresaremos con la segunda ponencia del día.